My name is Sydney Carter, and at 34 years old, I never expected my Victorian inheritance to tear my family apart. The beautiful two-story house my grandmother left me became my sanctuary after years of living in my sister Amber's shadow. I was finally finding happiness in my cozy home on a teacher's salary when my family dropped a bomb: sell the house to my sister or be disowned. What they didn't know was that Amber's CEO husband Malcolm had plans for my property that would change everything. Before I dive into my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life family dramas. Growing up in the shadow of a golden child is an experience that shapes you in ways that are hard to describe to someone who hasn't lived it. My sister Amber was everything my parents ever wanted in a daughter: brilliant, beautiful, and ambitious. From elementary school through high school, she maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA, was captain of the cheerleading squad, and was voted most likely to succeed in our senior yearbook. Our parents attended every academic ceremony, every competition, and showcased her trophies and medals in custom-built display cases in our living room. I, on the other hand, was the quieter sister, not unintelligent or unattractive, just different. While Amber excelled in math and science, I found my place in history and literature. I joined the debate team and the school newspaper, but these accomplishments rarely warranted more than a perfunctory "That's nice, Sydney" from my parents. There were no display cases for my debate certificates or framed copies of my published articles in the school paper. My sanctuary was my grandmother's Victorian home. Belina Carter, my father's mother, was the one person who seemed to see me for who I truly was. Every Sunday, I would escape to her house, a beautiful blue and white Victorian with intricate gingerbread trim on a tree-lined street in the historic district of our town. While my parents took Amber to science fairs or cheerleading competitions, I would sit with Grandma Alina in her sunroom, drinking tea from delicate china cups as she told me stories about our family history. "This house has sheltered 5 generations of Carters," she would tell me, running her fingers along the carved wooden banister of the main staircase. "Each generation has added their own touch, their own stories to these walls." She would walk me through each room, pointing out original features and sharing anecdotes about the family members who had lived there before us. The stained glass window in the stairwell landing that my great-grandfather had commissioned after returning from World War I. The secret compartment in the library floor where my great-great-grandmother had hidden family heirlooms during the Depression. The hand-painted ceiling medallion in the dining room that my grandmother herself had restored as a young bride. "History isn't just in books, Sydney," she would say. "It's in the places we live, the objects we treasure, the traditions we keep alive." Those Sunday afternoons with my grandmother nurtured my love of history and storytelling. They also provided a respite from the constant comparison to Amber that I experienced at home. In my grandmother's house, I wasn't Amber's sister or the other Carter girl. I was just Sydney, and that was enough. My passion for history eventually led me to pursue a degree in education. While Amber went to an Ivy League university on a full scholarship to study business, I attended the state university and became a high school history teacher. My parents attended Amber's graduation with flowers and expensive gifts. They sent me a card for mine. After college, Amber's trajectory continued upward. She landed a prestigious position at a financial firm, met and married Malcolm Reed, the CEO of a successful real estate development company, and moved into a luxury penthouse downtown. Their wedding was the social event of the season, with my parents sparing no expense to ensure it was perfect. My life took a different path. I rented a small apartment close to the high school where I taught, dated occasionally but never seriously, and continued my Sunday visits with my grandmother. As the years passed, I watched her age, her once nimble fingers growing gnarled with arthritis, her sharp mind occasionally faltering. But her love for me and for her home never diminished. "This house has a soul, Sydney," she told me during one of our last conversations. "It needs someone who will love it, who will honor its history while making new memories within its walls." When she passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 92, I grieved deeply for the woman who had been my greatest champion. What I didn't expect was that her final act would be one more gesture of understanding and love toward the granddaughter who had always felt overlooked. The reading of the will was held in the formal sitting room of the Victorian house. My parents, Amber and Malcolm, and I sat in uncomfortable silence as the family attorney, Mr. Peterson, adjusted his glasses and began to read. To my son Richard and his wife Diane, I leave my collection of antique silver and my personal jewelry, with the exception of pieces specifically designated below. My father nodded solemnly, while my mother's eyes lit up at the mention of jewelry. To my granddaughter Amber Reed, I leave my pearl necklace and matching earrings, which she admired at her wedding, along with the sum of $20,000. Amber smiled slightly, touching her throat as if she could already feel the pearls against her skin. And to my granddaughter Sydney Carter, who has shared my love for history and for this home, I leave my Victorian house at 423 Maple Street, along with all its contents not otherwise specified, and the remainder of my financial assets to help with its maintenance. The silence in the room became heavy and tense. My father's face reddened, my mother's mouth fell open, and Amber's smile froze in place. I sat in stunned disbelief, unable to process that my grandmother had left me her beloved home. "There must be some mistake," my mother finally said, breaking the silence. Mr. Peterson shook his head. "There's no mistake, Mrs. Carter. Alina was very clear about her wishes. She revised her will just 6 months ago, and she was of completely sound mind." But my father started to protest. "Richard," the attorney interrupted gently. "Your mother explained her reasoning to me. She believed Sydney would be the best custodian for the family home. She felt that Sydney truly appreciated its history and would preserve it with care." I looked around at my family's shocked faces, feeling a complex mixture of emotions: grief for my grandmother, surprise at her generosity, and a small, guilty spark of satisfaction at finally being chosen first for something important. The funeral for my grandmother was held at the historic chapel downtown, a building almost as old as her Victorian home. The ceremony was beautiful but somber, with elegant white lilies, her favorite, adorning the altar and pews. I delivered the eulogy, my voice breaking only once as I shared stories of Sunday afternoons spent learning family history over tea in delicate china cups. Throughout the service and the reception that followed at a nearby hotel, I could feel the tension emanating from my family. My parents were cordial but distant, accepting condolences with tight smiles while avoiding extended conversation with me. Amber and Malcolm circulated among the guests, her hand clutching his arm a little too tightly, her laughter a little too bright when speaking with family friends. 2 weeks after the funeral, I met with Mr. Peterson to finalize the paperwork for my inheritance. He handed me a sealed envelope along with the house key. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this privately," he said. Later that evening, sitting on the window seat in what would now be my bedroom, I opened the envelope with trembling fingers and read. "My dearest Sydney, if you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever adventure comes next. Don't grieve too much for me. I've had a wonderful life, especially those Sundays with you. I'm leaving you my home because I know you'll love it as I have. Your sister has found her path with Malcolm, and your parents have always supported her dreams. This house is my way of supporting yours. There's a special magic in these walls, not the supernatural kind, but the kind that comes from generations of lives well lived. Add your own chapter to our family's story, my darling girl. All my love. Grandma Alina. Tears streamed down my face as I folded the letter and held it to my heart. In that moment, I made a promise to honor my grandmother's faith in me by making this house my true home. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, cleaning, and adjusting to life in a house much larger than my apartment. I took a week off from teaching to sort through my grandmother's belongings, carefully deciding what to keep, what to store, and what to donate. Each room presented both challenges and joys as I discovered forgotten family treasures and made space for my own possessions. The master bedroom, with its bay window and window seat overlooking the garden, became my personal retreat. I kept my grandmother's antique 4-poster bed but replaced the mattress and updated the bedding with simple white linens. Her hand-crocheted throw remained draped across the foot of the bed, a tangible connection to her present. The kitchen required the most work. While I appreciated its vintage charm, the glass-fronted cabinets and the breakfast nook with built-in benches, the appliances were outdated and inefficient. Using part of the financial inheritance, I invested in new energy-efficient appliances that blended with the historic aesthetic of the house. The avocado green refrigerator gave way to a modern one with a vintage look, and the temperamental stove was replaced with a professional-grade range that would have made my grandmother smile in approval. "You always said cooking should be a pleasure, not a battle," I whispered to her memory as the delivery men installed the new appliances. The third-floor attic, which had primarily served as storage space during my grandmother's later years, I transformed into a home office. The dormer windows provided perfect natural light for grading papers, and the sloped ceilings created a cozy atmosphere for planning lessons. I set up a small desk for tutoring students who needed extra help, a way to supplement my teacher's salary and help with the increased expenses of maintaining a historic home. As spring arrived, I turned my attention to the garden. My grandmother had been an avid gardener in her younger years, and though the garden had become somewhat overgrown, the bones of her design remain. I spent weekends clearing beds, pruning roses, and replanting borders with perennials that would return year after year. The physical labor was therapeutic, helping me process my grief while connecting me to the land that had supported my family for generations. The neighbors on Maple Street welcomed me warmly, many remembering me from my Sunday visits over the years. Mrs. Johnson, the retired librarian next door, brought over a housewarming gift of homemade bread and local honey. Mr. and Mrs. Patel from across the street invited me to their annual block party, introducing me to residents I hadn't yet met. "Your grandmother was the heart of this neighborhood," Mrs. Patel told me, her eyes crinkling with affection. "She knew everyone's stories, celebrated their joys, and comforted them in sorrow. We've missed her presence." "I have big shoes to fill," I admitted. "Just be yourself, dear," she replied, patting my hand. "That's what Alina would have wanted." As the months passed, I settled into a rhythm in my new home. Weekdays were filled with teaching and occasional afternoon tutoring sessions in my attic office. The evenings found me cooking in my updated kitchen or reading in the sunroom where I had once shared tea with my grandmother. Weekends were for home projects, gardening, and exploring the neighborhood on foot, discovering local cafes, bookstores, and parks. For the first time in my life, I felt truly independent and at peace. The house, which had initially seemed almost too large for one person, now felt perfectly sized for my needs and future growth. Each room held memories of my grandmother while creating space for my own life to unfold. Contact with my family during this period was minimal and strained. My parents called occasionally with perfunctory check-ins that barely masked their lingering disapproval of my inheritance. Amber texted on birthdays and holidays, but made no effort to visit. I invited them all for dinner about 3 months after moving in a gesture of reconciliation, but only my father came, staying just long enough to be polite before claiming a work commitment. As he was leaving, he paused on the porch, looking back at the house with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mom loved this place," he said quietly, "more than she loved the people in it sometimes." "That's not true," I countered. "She loved us all. She just understood that different people need different kinds of support." He shook his head slightly. "Take care of yourself, Sydney," he said, and walked to his car without looking back. Despite these moments of family tension, my overall happiness in my new life was undeniable. The Victorian house had become more than an inheritance. It was my home, my sanctuary, and my future. What I didn't realize was that my period of peaceful independence was about to be disrupted in ways I could never have anticipated. Almost 2 years after inheriting my grandmother's Victorian home, I had settled comfortably into my life as a homeowner. The house had truly become mine, a blend of my grandmother's cherished antiques and my own more contemporary touches. The garden had flourished under my care, with the rose bushes my grandmother had planted decades ago producing more blooms than ever. I joined the neighborhood association and formed friendships with several neighbors who shared my interest in historic preservation. My relationship with my family remained distant but cordial. We exchanged perfunctory texts on birthdays and holidays, and I saw them at occasional extended family gatherings, where we maintained a polite facade that masked the underlying tension about my inheritance. So when Amber called me out of the blue on a Tuesday evening in April, I was surprised enough that I almost let the call go to voicemail. "Sydney, it's Amber." Her voice had that bright, slightly artificial quality she used when she wanted something. "I was wondering if Malcolm and I could stop by this weekend. It's been ages since I've seen your house." The slip was subtle but revealing. After 2 years, my sister still thought of it as our grandmother's house, not mine. "Sure," I replied cautiously. "How about Saturday afternoon? I could make lunch." "Perfect, around 1, and don't go to any trouble. We'll bring wine." When Saturday arrived, I found myself unexpectedly nervous. I spent the morning cleaning rooms that were already clean and preparing a more elaborate lunch than I had planned: a homemade quiche, fresh salad from my garden, and a lemon tart for dessert. I wanted to show Amber and Malcolm that I was a competent homeowner, capable of entertaining in the gracious style our grandmother had embodied. They arrived precisely at 1 o'clock, Amber carrying a bouquet of store-bought flowers along with the promised bottle of wine. Malcolm, tall and impeccably dressed in casual designer clothes, followed with a second bottle. "Sydney," Amber embraced me with enthusiasm that seemed slightly forced. "You look wonderful. Tishing must agree with you." "Thanks," I said, accepting the flowers. "Come in, I'll give you the tour." What followed was one of the strangest afternoons I'd experienced in my home. Amber, who had visited our grandmother countless times, but had never shown particular interest in the house itself, suddenly became effusive about every architectural detail. "These original hardwood floors are just incredible," she gushed, running her hand along the banister of the main staircase. "You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore. The crown molding in this dining room is spectacular," she exclaimed, gazing up at details she had never noticed during family dinners in this very room. "Is it original to the house?" "Yes," I replied, increasingly puzzled by her newfound enthusiasm. "Grandma said it was hand-carved by the original builder in 1897. Malcolm, who had been mostly silent during the tour, perked up at this. 1897, that's impressive. The construction must be solid." "It is," I confirm. "Grandma had an engineer inspect everything about 5 years ago. The foundation is in excellent condition, and the roof was replaced just before she passed away." Malcolm nodded, his eyes scanning the room with what I now recognize was a calculating gaze. "And the electrical? Plumbing? These old houses can be nightmares to maintain." "Grandma updated both about 15 years ago," I explain. "I've had a few minor issues, but nothing major." "Smart woman," he murmured. "Very forward-thinking." During lunch, the conversation shifted to more neutral topics: my teaching career, their recent vacation to the Maldives, mutual acquaintances from high school. But as we moved to the sunroom for coffee and dessert, Amber returned to the subject of the house. "I've been thinking a lot about this place lately," she said, setting her coffee cup on the antique side table. "So many childhood memories, you know. Remember how we used to play hide and seek upstairs during family gatherings?" I nodded, though my recollection was that Amber had usually preferred to stay downstairs with the adults, soaking up their attention, while I explored the upstairs rooms alone or with our younger cousin. "And those Sunday dinners," she continued, a wistful note in her voice. "Grandma's roast chicken and those amazing rolls she made from scratch." I bit back the urge to point out that Amber had often begged off those Sunday dinners, especially as a teenager, claiming homework or social engagements. Instead, I simply smiled and offered more tart. As they were preparing to leave, Amber wandered into the front parlor, where our grandmother had displayed family photographs on an antique secretary desk. "Oh, look at this one," she said, picking up a framed photo of us as children, sitting on the porch steps with our grandmother. "We were so cute. Don't you miss those simple days?" "Sometimes," I admitted, though my childhood memories were complicated by the constant comparison to my seemingly perfect sister. Malcolm, who had stepped outside to take a phone call, returned with a thoughtful expression. "This neighborhood has really maintained its character," he said, looking out the front window at the tree-lined street. "It's becoming quite desirable." Something in his tone made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't pinpoint why. "We should do this more often," Amber said as they left, giving me another hug. "Maybe you could come to our place next time." "That would be nice," I replied, though we both knew it was unlikely to happen. 3 weeks later, Amber called again, asking if they could stop by that weekend. "Malcolm was so impressed with your home," she explained. "He has some ideas about the garden you might like to hear." Their second visit followed a similar pattern, with Amber reminiscing about childhood memories I barely recognized and Malcolm asking increasingly detailed questions about the house and neighborhood. This time, he wanted to see the basement and attic, areas we hadn't toured on their first visit. In the basement, he tapped on walls and examined the foundation with what seemed like professional interest. "Remarkable condition for its age," he commented, more to himself than to me. In the attic office, he spent several minutes looking out the dormer windows, which offered a view of the entire street and the small park at its end. "Prime location," he murmured. As they were leaving, I overheard a fragment of conversation between them that sent a chill down my spine. "The whole block would be perfect," Malcolm was saying quietly to Amber as they walked to their car. "Property values in this area are set too, he broke off when he noticed me standing on the porch. That evening, I received a text from Amber. We're thinking of moving from the penthouse. It's beautiful but doesn't feel like a real home, you know? Malcolm wants something with more character. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but I still didn't understand the full picture. That changed 2 days later when I ran into Malcolm at the coffee shop around the corner from my house. He was deep in conversation with a man I didn't recognize, both of them studying documents spread across the table. I wouldn't have approached them, but Malcolm happened to look up as I was paying for my coffee. "Sydney," he said, hurriedly gathering the papers. "What a coincidence." "I live around the corner," I reminded him. "I come here almost every day." "Right, of course," he gestured to his companion. "This is James from my office. We're just discussing a potential project." I nodded politely to James, who seemed uncomfortable with my presence. "I should be going," I said, "papers to grade." As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of what looked like architectural renderings on one of the documents. Malcolm was sliding into his briefcase renderings that seemed to show a large, modern building where a row of historic homes currently stood. That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with suspicions and questions. Why the sudden interest in my house and neighborhood from a sister who had never cared about either? What was Malcolm really looking for during his inspection-like tours? And what were those renderings I had glimpsed? My unease grew stronger the following week when Amber called yet again, this time inviting me to dinner at their penthouse. "We have something we'd like to discuss with you," she said, her voice overly casual, "about the future." I agreed to the dinner, already dreading what that discussion might entail. My intuition was screaming that their interest in my home was not simply nostalgic or familial. Malcolm Reed was a CEO of a real estate development company, after all. And now, looking back, it seemed obvious that his interest had never been in my house as a potential home, it was in my house as a potential acquisition. The evening of the dinner at Amber and Malcolm's penthouse arrived with an ominous feeling I couldn't shake. I dressed carefully in a simple black dress and pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, drawing strength from this small connection to her. The 30-minute drive from my historic neighborhood to the gleaming downtown high-rise where they lived felt like crossing between worlds. Their penthouse occupied the entire top floor of one of the city's newest luxury buildings. The private elevator opened directly into their foyer, where a uniformed doorman had escorted me after announcing my arrival. The space was immaculately designed in shades of white, gray, and black, with occasional splashes of color from modern art pieces that probably cost more than my annual teaching salary. Amber greeted me with hair kisses and a glass of champagne. "Sydney, right on time. Don't you look nice?" Malcolm emerged from what appeared to be a home office, closing the door behind him. "Sydney, glad you could make it." His handshake was firm and professional, more appropriate for a business meeting than a family dinner. "Thanks for inviting me," I said, taking a sip of champagne to steady my nerves. "Your home is beautiful." "We like it," Amber replied, leading me through to the living area where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the city skyline. Though it can feel a bit impersonal sometimes, especially when we entertain. Dinner was served by a private chef who prepared and plated each course before discreetly disappearing back into the kitchen. The conversation remained superficial throughout the appetizer and main course. My teaching job, an upcoming charity gala Amber was helping organize, Malcolm's recent business trip to Singapore. It wasn't until the chef had served dessert and coffee before departing for the evening that the tone shifted. "So Sydney," Malcolm began, setting down his espresso cup with precision. "Amber and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future lately. About family, legacy, putting down roots." Amber reached for his hand, an adoring smile on her face. "We're ready to start a family," she announced. "And we've been talking about where we want to raise our children." "That's wonderful," I said cautiously, already sensing where this was heading. "Congratulations on making that decision." "We want a real home," Amber continued. "Something with history, with character, not a sterile apartment, no matter how luxurious." "The penthouse has served its purpose," Malcolm added. "It's been perfect for our lifestyle up to now. But children need space, a yard, a neighborhood with other families." I nodded, taking a slow sip of my coffee, waiting for them to reach their point. "Sydney," Amber leaned forward, her expression earnest. "We want to buy Grandma's house from you." And there it was, despite my suspicions, hearing the words spoken aloud sent a jolt through me. "My house," I corrected gently. Grandma left it to me, Amber. A flash of irritation crossed her face before she composed herself. Of course, your house, but you have to admit, it's a lot for one person. The maintenance, the costs, all that space. I manage just fine, I replied. I love my home. We're prepared to offer you market value, Malcolm interjected smoothly. You could buy something more suitable for a single woman, perhaps a nice condo closer to your school. You'd have money left over for travel, perhaps furthering your education. And think about the children, Amber added, her voice taking on a pleading quality. Your nieces or nephews, growing up in the family home, just like Grandma would have wanted. I set down my coffee cup carefully, aware that my hands were beginning to shake with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Grandma made her wishes very clear, I said. She wanted me to have the house because she knew how much I loved it, how much I valued its history. If she had wanted you to have it, she would have left it to you. Amber's face hardened. That's unfair and you know it. She was confused toward the end. She didn't really understand what she was doing. Mr. Peterson confirmed she was of sound mind when she revised her will, I reminded her. And she wasn't confused, Amber. She made a deliberate choice. A choice that makes no sense, Amber snapped, her facade of sisterly affection crumbling. I'm the one starting a family. I'm the one who needs a house like that. What are you doing with all that space? Teaching summer school students in the attic and growing tomatoes. Malcolm placed a restraining hand on her arm. What my wife is trying to say is that we're offering you a fair business transaction that would benefit everyone. You'd be financially better off, and we'd give the house the care and attention it deserves. The house already gets the care and attention it deserves, I said, rising from my chair. Thank you for dinner, but I think it's time for me to go. Sydney, wait, Amber called as I turned toward the foyer. You're not being reasonable. I paused, turning back to face them. I'm being perfectly reasonable. The house is mine, and I'm not interested in selling it, to you or anyone else. We're talking about 7 figures here, Malcolm said, his business persona now fully in place. I've had the property appraised. My offer will be significantly above market value. It's not about the money, I replied. Some things aren't for sale. The ride home in the elevator was tense, with Amber attempting to guilt me about family loyalty while Malcolm maintained a calculating silence. I was relieved when the doors finally opened to the lobby and I could escape into the cool night air. I thought that would be the end of it, an uncomfortable dinner and a rejected offer. I was wrong. 2 days later, my parents called and asked me to come to their house for Sunday lunch. I agreed, assuming it would be our usual stilted family gathering. Instead, I walked into an ambush. My parents, Amber, and Malcolm were all seated in the living room when I arrived, their expressions somber as if at a funeral. Sydney, my father began without preamble once I'd taken a seat. We need to discuss this situation with the house. There's nothing to discuss, I replied. It's my house, I'm not selling it. Darling, my mother interjected, using an endearment she hadn't directed at me in years. You're being very selfish. Amber and Malcolm are offering you a generous deal, and they want to start a family. How am I being selfish by keeping something that legally belongs to me? I asked. Something that was specifically left to me by Grandma. Because you're standing in the way of your sister's happiness, my father said sternly. Family comes first, Sydney. Your grandmother understood that principle, even if you don't. Grandma understood that Amber has always gotten everything she wanted, I countered, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. For once in my life, I got something special, something meaningful. And now you all want me to give that up too. It's just a house, my mother said dismissively. It's not just a house, I snapped. It's my home, it's my connection to Grandma. It's the one place I've ever felt truly valued and seen. Oh, here we go with the victim complex again, Amber rolled her eyes. Poor Sydney, always overlooked and underappreciated. That's enough, Amber, my father said, though his tone lacked real reprimand. He turned back to me, his expression hardening. Sydney, we've discussed this as a family, and we've come to a decision. Either you sell the house to your sister, or you're no longer welcome in this family. The ultimatum hung in the air, shocking in its cruelty and finality. I looked from my father's stern face to my mother's tight-lipped nod of agreement, to Amber's smug expression, and finally to Malcolm's impassive business mask. You would disown your own daughter over a house? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. This isn't about the house, my father replied. It's about your unwillingness to put family first. Your grandmother would be ashamed of your selfishness." Those words invoking my grandmother to manipulate me broke something inside me. I stood up, gathering my purse and keys with shaking hands. "Grandma would be ashamed, but not of me," I said, fighting back tears. "She'd be ashamed of how you're trying to bully me into giving up what she specifically wanted me to have. She'd be ashamed that you've always favored one daughter over the other. And she'd be heartbroken to see you threatening to cut me off over this." "Sydney," my mother began, but I cut her off. "No, I'm done. If this is your idea of family, then maybe I'm better off without it." I walked out, slamming the door behind me, and drove home with tears streaming down my face. The beautiful Victorian house that had always been my sanctuary now felt like the center of a storm that was tearing my family apart. For the first time since inheriting it, I questioned whether my grandmother had done me a favor or saddled me with a burden that would cost me what little family connection I had left. That night, as I sat alone in my grandmother's sunroom, my sunroom now surrounded by the plants we had both loved, I made a decision. I would not be bullied or manipulated into giving up my home. If my family chose to disown me over this, that would be their choice to live with, not mine. What I didn't yet realize was that the ultimatum was just the beginning. The true nature of Malcolm's interest in my property was about to be revealed, and it would change everything. The week following my family's ultimatum was one of the most difficult of my life. I went through the motions of teaching my classes, grading papers, and maintaining my home, but inside I felt hollow and adrift. My family's willingness to cut me off completely over the house had shaken me to my core, forcing me to reevaluate relationships I had taken for granted despite their flaws. The calls and texts began almost immediately, my mother leaving tearful voicemails about family duty, my father sending terse messages asking if I had come to my senses yet, and Amber alternating between angry accusations and saccharine pleas about her future children growing up in their rightful home. I stopped answering after the first day, unable to bear the emotional manipulation. By Friday, I was emotionally exhausted and decided to treat myself to breakfast at Maple Street Cafe, a cozy establishment at the end of my block that made exceptional blueberry pancakes. The cafe was busy with the morning rush, and I took the last available table near the window, grateful for the comforting bustle of normal life around me. I was halfway through my pancakes when a man approached my table, coffee cup in hand. "Excuse me," he said. "All the other seats are taken. Would you mind if I joined you?" I hesitated, not really in the mood for company, but the cafe was crowded and he had a kind face. "Sure," I replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Thanks, I'm Ethan Parker," he said, setting down his cup and extending his hand. "Sydney Carter," I replied, shaking it briefly. "Carter," he looked at me more closely. "Any relation to Alina Carter who lived in the blue Victorian on this street?" "She was my grandmother," I said, surprised. "I inherited her house when she passed away 2 years ago." "I thought you looked familiar," he said with a warm smile. "I worked with Malcolm Reed. I've seen you in photos on his wife's desk." My stomach tightened at the mention of Malcolm. "You work with Malcolm?" "Worked," he corrected, his expression clouding slightly. "I left Reed Development Group about a month ago. Creative differences, you could say." Something in his tone made me curious. What kind of creative differences? Ethan hesitated, taking a sip of his coffee. "Let's just say I wasn't comfortable with the direction some of the company's projects were taking." I set down my fork, my appetite suddenly gone. "Projects like what?" He studied me for a moment, seeming to debate how much to share. "Are you aware that your brother-in-law's company has been buying up properties in this neighborhood?" "No," I said slowly, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. "I wasn't aware of that." "Reed Development has been quietly acquiring homes and businesses in the historic district for the past 8 months, Ethan explained. They're planning a major mixed-use development, luxury condos, high-end retail, office space. The kind of project that would completely transform the neighborhood." "But this is a historic district," I protested. "There are preservation laws, zoning restrictions." "Laws can be changed with the right connections and enough money," Ethan said grimly. "Malcolm has both. He's been working closely with certain members of the city council to rezone the area. The historic designation is being reassessed as we speak." I felt as if the floor had dropped out from under me. So when Amber and Malcolm said they wanted to buy my house to start a family, they were lying, Ethan confirmed. "Your house is a key property in the development plan. It sits at the center of the block they want to demolish for the main building." Demolish, I repeated, the word sticking in my throat. They want to tear down my grandmother's house? Ethan nodded solemnly, along with most of the historic homes on this street. That's partly why I left the company. I'm an architect. I got into this profession to create beautiful spaces that enhance communities, not destroy their character for profit. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this betrayal. Not only had my sister and brother-in-law lied about wanting my house for sentimental reasons, but they planned to demolish it, the home my grandmother had loved and preserved for decades, the home she had trusted me to care for. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, Ethan said gently, but I thought you should know what you're really up against. Thank you, I managed to say. I appreciate your honesty. After leaving the cafe, I walked straight home and opened my laptop. With Ethan's revelations guiding my search, I quickly found evidence that supported his claims. Local business forums mentioned redevelopment groups increasing interest in the historic district. A real estate blog discussed rumors of a major redevelopment project that would bring modern luxury to the charming but outdated neighborhood. Most damning of all was an article in the business section of our local newspaper from just 3 weeks earlier, quoting Malcolm directly. We see tremendous potential in revitalizing underutilized areas of historic significance with contemporary amenities that today's consumers demand. The article was accompanied by a conceptual rendering of a gleaming glass and steel complex rising where my street currently stood, though the exact location wasn't specified. The Victorian homes that had stood for over a century were nowhere to be seen in the artist's vision of the future. My shock gradually gave way to anger as I continued my research. Not only had my family pressured me to sell under false pretenses, but they had been willing to cut me off completely to facilitate a plan that would erase my grandmother's beloved home and the historic character of the entire neighborhood. I picked up my phone and, for the first time in days, made a call to my sister. "Sydney," Amber answered, sounding surprised. "Have you finally come to your senses?" "I know about the development project," I said without preamble. "I know you and Malcolm never intended to live in my house. You were going to tear it down." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Who told you that?" she finally asked, her voice tight. "Does it matter? It's true, isn't it?" Another pause. "Sydney, you don't understand the complexities of urban development." "Don't patronize me," I interrupted. "Just tell me the truth. For once in your life, be honest with me." Amber sighed. "The neighborhood is changing, Sydney. Property values are stagnating while maintenance costs for these old houses keep rising. Malcolm's project would revitalize the entire area. By destroying it, I countered, by erasing its history and character. By bringing it into the 21st century, she argued. These old houses are charming, but they're not practical for modern living. They're energy inefficient, constantly need repairs. That's not your decision to make, I cut in. These homes belong to the people who live in them, who love them, who chose them specifically for their history and character. People like you are standing in the way of progress, Amber said, her tone turning cold. Malcolm's project would create jobs, increase the tax base, provide modern housing options. Save the sales pitch, I interrupted again. I'm not interested, and I'm certainly not selling my house so your husband can tear it down for profit. You're being incredibly selfish, she snapped. This project would benefit the entire city. No, it would benefit Malcolm's company and its investors, I corrected, at the expense of everyone who calls this neighborhood home. Mom and Dad are right, Amber said bitterly. You've always been difficult, always had to do things your own way instead of considering what's best for the family. Funny how what's best for the family always seems to align with what's best for you, I replied. Goodbye, Amber. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with anger and hurt. The depth of my family's deception was breathtaking. They hadn't just asked me to give up my home, they had conspired to destroy it while pretending to value its history and meaning. That evening, I noticed a flyer in my mailbox announcing a community meeting about proposed zoning changes in the historic district. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at the community center. According to the flyer, representatives from Reed Development Group would be presenting their vision for neighborhood enhancement. I marked the date on my calendar, determined to attend and to alert my neighbors to what was really being planned for our street. I battle to save my grandmother's house had suddenly expanded into a fight for the entire neighborhood she had called home for over 60 years. The next morning, I began knocking on doors, flyer in hand, asking my neighbors if they were aware of the development plans. Some had received buyout offers from redevelopment, but hadn't connected them to a larger project. Others had heard rumors but dismissed them as unlikely given the historic designation of the area. They can't just come in and tear down a historic district, Mrs. Johnson, my next-door neighbor, insisted when I spoke with her. There are laws protecting these homes. Laws can be changed, I told her, repeating Ethan's warning, especially when there's enough money and political influence involved. By the time Thursday arrived, I had spoken with most of the residents on my street and many from the surrounding blocks. The community center was packed for the meeting, the atmosphere tense with anticipation and concern. Malcolm looked momentarily startled when he saw me in the front row, but quickly recovered his professional demeanor. His presentation was slick and persuasive, full of appealing renderings and promises of economic growth, increased property values, and improved amenities. The historic Maple District has tremendous potential, he concluded, gesturing to a final slide showing the glass and steel complex I had seen online. Our project would honor the neighborhood's past while embracing its future. When the floor opened for questions, I was the first to stand. Mr. Reed, I said clearly, meeting his gaze, your presentation mentioned honoring the neighborhood's past, but your plans show the complete demolition of historic homes that have stood for over a century. How exactly does erasing history honor it? A murmur ran through the crowd as Malcolm's smile tightened. Miss Carter, as my sister-in-law, I understand you have a personal attachment to one of the properties in question. But progress requires change, and sometimes that means making difficult choices for the greater good. The greater good, I challenged, or the good of redevelopment and its investors? Before he could respond, another resident stood up. I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, the elderly man said. My wife and I raised our children here. Our home isn't just a property, it's our life. What makes you think you have the right to take that from us? One by one, other residents rose to speak, expressing their dismay at the prospect of losing their historic homes and the character of their beloved neighborhood. The meeting, which Malcolm had clearly expected to be a straightforward presentation of an exciting new development, had turned into a community uprising. As I left the community center that evening, a woman approached me. She introduced herself as Rebecca Torres, a preservationist with the local historical society. That was quite a showing tonight, she said. I've been trying to raise awareness about redevelopment's plans for months, but it's been difficult to get people engaged. Well, they're engaged now, I replied, watching groups of neighbors continuing heated discussions in the parking lot. We need to organize, Rebecca said. Form a coalition, gather signatures, attend city council meetings. This fight is just beginning. I'm in, I told her without hesitation, whatever it takes. As I walked home that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced since receiving my family's ultimatum. Hope. I was no longer facing this battle alone. An entire community stood with me, united in the desire to preserve our homes and the history they represented. What I didn't yet know was that the evidence Ethan had provided was just the tip of the iceberg. Malcolm's plans for our neighborhood were more advanced and more devious than any of us had realized, and uncovering the full truth would require courage I wasn't sure I possessed. The weeks following the community meeting transformed me from a relatively private high school history teacher into an unlikely neighborhood activist. Rebecca Torres from the Historical Society became not just an ally but a friend as we worked together to organize the growing resistance to redevelopment's plan. My dining room table, where my grandmother had hosted countless family dinners, became our war room covered with maps, property records, zoning documents, and lists of city council members and their voting histories. Weekends and evenings were filled with coalition meetings, petition drives, and research into historic preservation laws. You're a natural at this, Rebecca remarked one evening as we prepared information packets for an upcoming city council meeting. Your grandmother would be proud. I hope so, I said, thinking of Alina's quiet determination when facing challenges. I just never imagined I'd be fighting my own family to save her home. Speaking of which, Rebecca said carefully, have you had any contact with them since the community meeting? I shook my head, radio silence. My parents haven't called, and Amber blocked me on social media after I confronted her about the development plans. And Malcolm? He sent a formal letter offering to increase his purchase offer for my house by 15%, I said with a bitter laugh. As if the problem was just that he wasn't offering enough money. Rebecca squeezed my shoulder sympathetically. Money isn't everything. Not to me, I agreed, but to Malcolm that seems to be the only thing that matters. Our coalition's first major victory came when we successfully petitioned the city's Historic Preservation Board to conduct a new evaluation of the district's historical significance. This forced a temporary halt to any rezoning decisions while the evaluation was underway. Malcolm's response was swift. The day after the Preservation Board's announcement, a glossy mailer arrived at every home in the city, extolling the economic benefits of the Maple Street Renewal Project and dismissing concerns about historic preservation as nostalgia standing in the way of progress. "He's taking this to the court of public opinion," Rebecca observed when I showed her the mailer, "trying to paint us as obstructionists preventing economic growth." "We need to respond," I said, "tell our side of the story." With help from a coalition member who worked in public relations, we organized a historic homes tour of the neighborhood, inviting the public to see what would be lost if the development proceeded. The event drew hundreds of visitors and generated positive coverage in the local newspaper, shifting the narrative from economic development versus preservation to a more nuanced discussion about responsible growth that respected community character. Throughout these weeks of activism, Ethan Parker, the former Reed development architect who had first alerted me to Malcolm's plans, became an invaluable ally. His insider knowledge of the company's practices and his professional expertise helped us anticipate Malcolm's next moves and craft effective responses. "Malcolm always follows the same playbook," Ethan explained during one strategy session. "When faced with community resistance, he looks for leverage, something or someone he can use to break through the opposition." "What kind of leverage?" I asked. "It varies. Sometimes it's offering financial incentives to key community leaders. Sometimes it's finding building code violations or tax issues to pressure property owners. Sometimes it's more creative." Ethan's warning proved prescient. The following week, several of our most vocal coalition members received letters from Reed Development's legal team, alleging various infractions from improper fence heights to unauthorized home businesses, threatening legal action if they continued to spread misinformation about the company's plans. "It's intimidation, pure and simple," Rebecca fumed when Mrs. Johnson, my elderly neighbor, showed us the letter she had received about her garden shed supposedly violating setback requirements. "They're trying to scare people into silence." Instead of being intimidated, the letters galvanized our community further. A local attorney offered pro bono services to affected residents, and we organized a press conference to publicly call out Reed Development's bullying tactic. Malcolm's desperation became increasingly evident as his initial timeline for the project slipped further behind schedule. According to Ethan, the company had already secured financing and commitments from potential commercial tenants based on breaking ground by the end of the year, commitments that were now in jeopardy. "We're hurting him where it counts his bottom line," Ethan said with grim satisfaction. "But that also makes him more dangerous. Malcolm doesn't like to lose." The truth of that statement became clear when Ethan called me late one evening, his voice tense with urgency. "Sydney, I need to see you right away. I've found something you need to see." 20 minutes later, Ethan was at my dining room table, spreading out documents he had obtained from a former colleague still working at Reed Development. "Malcolm has been planning this project for over a year," he explained, pointing to dated proposals and correspondence. "Look at this timeline. He began purchasing properties in the neighborhood 3 months before your grandmother passed away." I scanned the documents, my stomach churning as I processed what this meant. So when Amber started showing interest in my house. "It wasn't coincidental," Ethan confirmed. "Malcolm had already identified your grandmother's property as a key acquisition for the development. When she left it to you instead of your parents as he might have expected, it complicated his plans." "But how could he know Grandma would pass away when she did?" I asked, struggling to comprehend the level of calculation involved. "He couldn't," Ethan acknowledged. "But look at this." He pointed to another document, a preliminary site plan dated over a year earlier. "Your grandmother's house was always central to the development. Malcolm would have needed to acquire it eventually, one way or another." I felt sick as I studied the documents further. So my sister's sudden nostalgia about the house, her claims about wanting to raise children here, it was all a script. A strategy to get me to sell. "Based on these documents, yes," Ethan said gently. "I'm sorry, Sydney." Among the papers was a particularly damning email from Malcolm to his project manager, dated just after my grandmother's will had been read, Carter property complication. Will pursue family leverage option before considering alternatives. S. Carter equals school teacher, limited resources, confidence high. Family leverage option, I repeated, the words burning like acid. That's what the ultimatum was, using my parents to pressure me into selling. There's more, Ethan said grimly, pulling out additional papers. Malcolm has been in private meetings with Councilman Williams about expediting the rezoning process, bypassing some of the required public hearings. There are indications of improper financial arrangement. You mean bribes? Consulting fees is the term they use, but essentially, yes. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the deception and corruption. We need to take this to the authorities. And the press. Ethan nodded in agreement. I've made copies of everything. But Sydney, once we do this, there's no going back. Malcolm will know where these documents came from. My career in this town will be over. You'd risk that? I asked, touched by his willingness to put principles above professional security. Some things are worth standing up for, he said simply. Over the next few days, Rebecca, Ethan, and I worked with a reporter from the city newspaper who specialized in local government investigations. We provided copies of the documents, connected her with other sources, and prepared for the fallout when the story broke. The article, headline, Developers, Officials Accused of Backroom Deals in Historic District Controversy, ran on the front page of the Sunday edition. By Monday morning, the city was buzzing with the revelations, and the mayor had announced an official investigation into the rezoning process and Councilman Williams' relationship with Reed Development. Malcolm's response was immediate and personal. He called my cell phone directly, his voice cold with fury. You've made a serious mistake, Sydney. You have no idea what you've started. I know exactly what I've started, I replied, surprised by my own calmness, the truth coming to light. We could have resolved this as a family, he said. Now you've forced my hand. There's nothing to resolve, Malcolm. I'm not selling my house. Not to you, not to anyone. We'll see about that, he said before hanging up. That evening, as I was grading papers in my sunroom, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I was shocked to find my parents and Amber standing on the porch, their expressions a mixture of anger and discomfort. We need to talk, my father said tersely. I hesitated, then stepped back to let them in. Come into the living room. They filed in silently, taking seats on the sofa and chairs where just months earlier we had enjoyed our last peaceful family gathering before everything fell apart. What's this about? I asked, though I could guess. You know exactly what it's about, Amber snapped. The Hachette job in the newspaper. Malcolm's company is facing an investigation because of you. Because of Malcolm's own actions, I corrected. I didn't invent those documents or force him to try to bribe city officials. Those documents were stolen company property, my father said sternly. Malcolm could press charges against you and your architect friend. Let him try, I replied. The whistleblower protections in this state are quite strong. This isn't a game, Sydney, my mother interjected. This is your family's reputation. Your sister's marriage, your father's standing in the business community. And what about my home? I asked. What about the homes of everyone else in this neighborhood? What about Grandma's legacy that you were all willing to see demolished for profit? Don't be so dramatic, Amber said with an eye roll. It's just a house. No, it's not just a house, I retorted, my patience finally snapping. And you know that, or you wouldn't have pretended to want it for sentimental reasons. You wouldn't have manipulated me with fake stories about wanting to raise your children here. You lied to me, Amber. You all did. My mother at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. We thought it would be easier if you believed the house would stay in the family. You thought it would be easier to trick me than to tell me the truth, I corrected. Easier to threaten to disown me than to respect my right to keep what legally belongs to me. Malcolm is prepared to make you a final offer, my father said, ignoring my words. Double the market value, plus a condo of your choosing in the new development. I laughed incredulously. Are you serious? After everything that's happened, you think I'd sell to him now? Be reasonable, Sydney, my father urged. This development is going to happen, with or without your cooperation. The smart move is to take the offer while it's still on the table. The development is not going to happen, I said firmly. Not with the investigation underway, not with the historic designation being reinforced, and certainly not with the entire neighborhood united against it. You can't fight someone like Malcolm, Amber said, a note of genuine concern in her voice for the first time. He doesn't give up when he wants something. Neither do I replied. I learned that from Grandma. My father stood abruptly. This is your final chance, Sydney. Sell the house or consider yourself no longer part of this family. I looked at each of them, my father's stern face, my mother's averted eyes, Amber's conflicted expression, and felt a surprising sense of clarity and calm. I made my choice weeks ago, I said quietly. I choose my home, my integrity, and a community that actually supports each other. If that means losing a family that would disown me over a business deal, then so be it. Sydney, my mother began, but my father cut her off. We're done here, he said coldly. Don't call us when this all comes crashing down around you. They filed out as silently as they had entered, leaving me alone in the house that had become the center of so much conflict. But instead of the devastation I might have expected to feel at this final rupture with my family, I experienced an odd sense of peace. The truth was finally out in the open, and with it came the certainty that I was fighting not just for a house, but for what was right. What I didn't anticipate was that the confrontation with my family would lead to one final, unexpected revelation, one that would change everything, including Amber herself. The week following the newspaper exposé and my confrontation with my family was a whirlwind. The mayor's investigation into Malcolm's dealings with Councilman Williams expanded to include several other city officials. The Historic Preservation Board expedited their evaluation of our neighborhood and unanimously recommended strengthening, rather than removing, its protected status. Redevelopment's stock price dropped as investors grew nervous at the scandal and potential litigation. Through it all, I continued teaching my history classes, finding unexpected comfort in the routine of lesson plans and student discussions. Many of my students had read about the controversy in the newspaper or heard their parents talking about it, and they asked thoughtful questions about historic preservation and community activism. I found myself sharing the experience as a real-world civics lesson, showing them that ordinary citizens could indeed make a difference when they organized and stood together for a cause they believed in. Miss Carter, one of my seniors, asked during a discussion, "Wasn't it hard to stand up to your own family like that?" Yes, I admitted, seeing no reason to hide the personal cost. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But sometimes doing the right thing means making difficult choices. Was it worth it? Another student asked. I thought about my empty dining room table, no longer covered with coalition documents but also no longer hosting family gatherings. I thought about the texts and calls from my parents and sister that had ceased entirely. I thought about the house I had saved, the neighborhood that had united, and the inner strength I had discovered. Yes, I said finally, it was worth it. Outside school hours, I remained busy with coalition activities as we worked to ensure the historic district would be protected long-term. Rebecca and I drafted a proposal for a community land trust that would provide additional safeguards against future development threats. Ethan contributed his architectural expertise to a neighborhood improvement plan that would address infrastructure needs while preserving historic character. Ethan and I had grown closer through our shared battle against Malcolm's development. What had begun as an alliance of convenience had evolved into a genuine friendship and, increasingly, something more. We found ourselves lingering over coffee after coalition meetings, sharing stories about our childhoods, our dreams, our favorite books and films. His quiet integrity and genuine passion for historic architecture complemented my more outspoken advocacy, and I found myself looking forward to his perspective on everything from preservation strategies to movie recommendations. 10 days after the newspaper story broke, I received an unexpected text message from Amber. "Can we talk, just the two of us? It's important." My first instinct was to refuse, assuming it was another attempt to pressure me about the house. But something in the simplicity of the request gave me pause. After a moment's consideration, I texted back, "Okay, coffee at Maple Street Cafe tomorrow at 10. "Thank you," she replied immediately. "I'll be there." I arrived at the cafe early, claiming a quiet table in the corner where we could speak privately. Amber arrived precisely at 10, looking unusually subdued in jeans and a simple sweater rather than her typical designer outfit. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she lacked the polished perfection I associated with my sister. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "What's this about, Amber?" I asked, not unkindly but wary of another manipulation attempt. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, staring into it as if it might offer guidance. I left Malcolm, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Of all the things I had expected her to say, this wasn't on the list. You what? I moved out 3 days ago, she continued. I'm staying at a hotel downtown while I figure things out. Amber, I faltered, unsure how to respond. What happened? She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and determination. The article happened. The investigation happened. Finding out that my husband was willing to bribe city officials and threaten elderly neighbors happened. She took a shaky breath. And you happened, Sydney. You stood up to all of us, including me, because you believed in something. When was the last time I did that? I sat back, stunned by her words and the raw honesty behind them. For as long as I could remember, Amber had been the golden child, the perfect daughter, the successful sister. I had never imagined her questioning her choices or admiring my stand against the family. I didn't know about the bribes, she continued when I remained silent. I swear I didn't. But I did know about the development plan. I knew Malcolm wanted your house for the project, not for us to live in. I lied to you about wanting to raise children there, about all those nostalgic memories I suddenly claimed to have. Why? I asked, the one question that had haunted me through this entire ordeal. Because that's what Malcolm told me to do, she admitted, shame coloring her voice. He said it would be easier to get you to sell if you thought the house would stay in the family. And I went along with it because that's what I've always done. Gone along with what others wanted from me. Been the perfect daughter, the supportive wife, the successful sister. Even if it meant lying to me, threatening to cut me out of the family. She winced. That was Mom and Dad, but yes, I supported it. I'm so sorry, Sydney. I can't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I see now how wrong I was. I studied my sister's face, seeing for the first time in years the vulnerable person beneath the perfect facade. What will you do now? I don't know, she admitted. Get a divorce, obviously. Find my own place. Figure out who I am when I'm not being who everyone else wants me to be. She attempted a smile. Maybe take inspiration from my little sister who had the courage to stand up for what she believed in, even when it cost her her family. You haven't lost me, I said quietly, surprising myself with the realization that despite everything, I didn't want to lose my sister. I'm still here. Tears welled in Amber's eyes. After everything I did. Families are complicated, I said, thinking of our grandmother's wisdom. And they're not always defined by blood. The people in this neighborhood have become a kind of family to me over the past few months. They stood by me when I needed support. Maybe that's what real family does, supports you when you're trying to do the right thing, even when it's difficult. I'd like to learn how to be that kind of family, Amber said softly. Our conversation continued for hours, more open and honest than any we had shared since childhood. Amber revealed the pressure she had always felt to be perfect, to meet our parents' expectations, to validate their pride in her. I shared my feelings of being overlooked, of never quite measuring up, of finding validation only in my grandmother's unconditional love. She saw you, Amber said thoughtfully. Really saw you in a way Mom and Dad never saw either of us. They saw what they wanted to see, the perfect daughter in me, the disappointing one in you. Grandma saw the truth. Which was that you had integrity and passion and independence. That you cared about things that mattered: history, preservation, community. Not just success and status. She smiled wryly. She was right to leave you the house. You were always the one who truly appreciated it. As autumn turned to winter, the neighborhood coalition's efforts bore fruit. The city council, under intense public scrutiny following the bribery investigation, unanimously approved permanent enhanced protections for the historic district. Redevelopment officially abandoned the Maple Street project, and Malcolm resigned as CEO amid shareholder pressure. The company's new leadership issued a public apology to the neighborhood and announced a shift toward restoration projects rather than new development. My relationship with my parents remained strained, though Amber's departure from her marriage had caused them to reconsider some of their positions. My mother called occasionally, her conversation tentative but increasingly genuine. My father remained distant but had stopped demanding I sell the house, perhaps recognizing the battle was decisively lost. Amber rented an apartment across town and began volunteering with the Historical Society, finding unexpected satisfaction in helping to document and preserve the stories of our city's past. Our relationship, while still healing, grew stronger as we learned to see each other as individuals rather than rivals or stereotypes. One crisp December evening, 6 months after the community meeting that had launched our preservation battle, I hosted a holiday gathering in my home for the neighborhood coalition members who had become such an important part of my life. Rebecca brought homemade cookies, Mrs. Johnson contributed her famous spiced cider, and other neighbors filled the dining room table with potluck offerings that honored various cultural traditions. Ethan arrived last, carrying a small wrapped package. "For you," he said, handing it to me with a smile that now made my heart skip. "A housewarming gift, even though you've been here for over 2 years." Inside was a beautifully crafted wooden plaque designed to mount beside my front door. Carved into its surface were the words, "The Carter House," and beneath them, "Preserved with Love, 2025. "It's perfect," I said, blinking back tears as I hugged him. "You're perfect," he whispered back, and in that moment, surrounded by my chosen family in the home my grandmother had entrusted to me, I felt a sense of belonging and purpose stronger than anything I had known before. Later that evening, as the gathering wound down and guests began to depart, a surprising visitor arrived. Amber stood on the porch, a hesitant smile on her face and a poinsettia plant in her arms. "I know I wasn't invited," she said when I opened the door. "But I wanted to drop this off and wish you happy holidays." "Come in," I said without hesitation. "There's plenty of food left, and people I'd like you to meet." As I introduced Amber to my neighbors, to Rebecca and Ethan, to the community that had stood with me through the fight to save our historic district, I thought about the journey of the past year. What had begun as a battle over a house had become something much more significant, a reclaiming of my voice, a discovery of my strength, and a redefining of what family truly meant. The Victorian house my grandmother had left me had indeed turned out to be a precious gift, but not in the way either of us could have anticipated. It had given me a cause worth fighting for, a community worth belonging to, and ultimately, the courage to stand firm in my own truth. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you," Rebecca said quietly, joining me by the window as I watched Amber chatting animatedly with Mrs. Johnson about historical preservation techniques. "I think she'd be proud of both of us," I replied, watching my sister begin to find her own authentic path. "She always said this house had a special magic to it, not the supernatural kind, but the kind that comes from generations of lives well lived." "She was right," Rebecca nodded. "Some places do have that power to transform, to heal, to bring people together." As the evening drew to a close and the last guests departed, I stood on the porch of my Victorian home, watching snowflakes begin to fall gently on the historic street that had been saved by community action and personal courage. The house stood as it had for over a century, its blue and white exterior gleaming in the glow of the wrought iron street lamps, its windows warm with welcoming light. Inside was the life I had built, not the one my parents had expected for me, not the one society might have valued most, but one that was authentically mine. A life of purpose and integrity, of meaningful work and genuine connections, of standing up for what matters even when it's difficult. I thought of all the lessons this journey had taught me, that family can be both born and chosen, that some battles are worth fighting even at great personal cost, that standing your ground isn't selfish when you're standing for something that matters, and perhaps most importantly, that it's never too late to redefine your relationships, your priorities, and your sense of home. What started with my parents demanding I sell my house to my sister or be disowned had ended with something none of us could have predicted: a stronger community, a more authentic family connection, and a deeper understanding of what truly makes a house a home. Have you ever had to stand up for something important against pressure from those close to you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories, and share with someone who might need encouragement to stand their ground. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most meaningful growth.